Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the War Report. And we got quite an episode ahead of us, but just as an announcement at the beginning of the show, on Sunday we will be recording a special episode with former War Report guest Vile Varangian. He'll be back on. That'll probably be up by next Monday, so keep your eye out for that. We're going to talk about all things Russia, Eastern Europe, like last time. It should be a good discussion, so be sure to catch that one too. But without further ado, we will get right into the news. And probably one of two biggest news items today is Joe Biden has finally announced his running mate, and it was narrowed down to three and then two. The initial three were Kamala Harris, Susan Rice, and Karen Bass. It got narrowed down to Susan Rice and Kamala Harris, and the finalist, our winner for that contest, is Kamala Harris. And to a bit of surprise myself, but again, not too surprising, I thought it was going to be Susan Rice, but in retrospect, it makes sense that was Kamala. A very, I would say, safe choice. Gets the diversity points in, but not too far left, not too quote unquote radical. It picks the former prosecutor, which I do find a little bit of humor in, all things considered, with everything going on. But Biden's got his running mate, and truth be told, she'll probably be the head of the campaign with Biden's slipping mental state and everything else going on. She'll be speaking a lot on his behalf and probably doing a lot of rallies too and making up for what campaign events Biden should be doing. But again, we'll have to see within the next 3 months, it is now, how many public rallies they'll be able to have with COVID and everything, and how many of these things will have to be virtual, because the Democratic National Convention is going to be a teleconference, which isn't really a surprise, and there'll be the official nomination process of Biden and of Kamala Harris, and then we'll finally be in that final stretch of the campaign because the DNC is in about a week and a half. I know the Republicans are doing something similar. I think they're doing theirs partially in person, which, uh, again, I don't think that's really going to help or harm them either way. It doesn't really matter on that note, but yeah, we'll be in that final stretch. September and October will bring the debates, and then by the beginning of November, we will have the presidential election. So yeah, it's closer than you think. I was taken aback. I think we're like 80 something days out now. But I don't know. What do you make of Vice President Kamala Harris?
W- Well, I thought Biden wanted to win. Where is Stacey Abrams?
No, no. Where's Tim Cook? That's my question.
That's he could have dominated. A Tim Cook with a nice tan. I don't know. I mean, it makes sense, right? Like you, I was thinking and kind of hoping, us being sort of the irony bros of geopolitics, that it would be somebody that we could half-heartedly respect, like Susan Rice. But as you said off air, she'll have a position, and it will probably be a more suitable position than vice president
Yeah,
because
I'm almost certain if Biden wins, she'll be number one, either Secretary of State or National Security Advisor, which she was under Obama's second term. And again, someone like her, I think, gives a bit more direction to where things are going, because Kamala is just, again, very stale neoliberal with a somewhat tough on crime thing, and enough to appease some of the more quote unquote moderate Democrats, as it were. But Susan Rice would have given us a direction. This is what Biden's doing. He's really going to be focused on the projection of power abroad rather than the at home issues, which, again, right now, doing something like that with the current state of the country and the political, cultural, racial divisions, whatever, that's not really something they can do. Now, if this whole Black Lives Matter uprising, as it were, didn't happen, we might have gotten someone like Susan Rice or somebody focused more on the American empire and the projection of power outside of our borders. But seeing the tumultuous state in the home base, as it were, they have to pick somebody like Kamala, who's supposed to be a compromise candidate of the people who want diversity representation, the people concerned about crime, perhaps, and pretty much those two things. I can't think of any other reasons people would want a Kamala in there besides that she's a woman of color and she has a record as a prosecutor. Really, what else is there to her?
Well, she's slimmer than some of the other candidates,
Yeah, I
except
mean,
for.
Stacy, the size of an Abrams.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah. Just as an aside, because I figured that this is probably relevant, and we may get into this in a few episodes from now. But apparently, the Marine Corps disbanded their entire tank corps when Abrams and everything. So yeah, yeah. Again, we'll have to do a little bit of a talk on fourth generation warfare and the direction that the United States is really seeing future wars going. But I figured I'd just mention that as an aside since it came up.
Very interesting. I did not know that. Yeah, I mean, Kamala Harris as a candidate, as Biden's choice, makes perfect sense in light of things. Um, it was a wise decision. I can't even believe that 5 6 months ago Biden actually won the whole thing, and here we are. Um,
And
yeah,
he's
it's
consistently pulling ahead in several key states.
yes.
Even though, again, I will say I attribute that to the fact that he has the being the other candidate factor because he hasn't done many public appearances. He hasn't done many interviews. The ones he has done, he stutters and stammers like there's no tomorrow. But as of now, when people get asked Trump or Biden, they think, well, at least not Trump, and they may disapprove Trump because they never liked him, because he's let them down, because of recent events such as people who get memed into thinking Trump is is a member of the KKK or whatever. But I mean, my prediction for the general election is once Biden is forced to speak publicly again, whether that be through debates, whether that be through even virtual town halls or stuff, his poll numbers are going to plummet because people are going to realize he can hardly form a sentence even on a good day.
Yeah. Uh, I mean, ultimately, it's about getting the country that wants to vote Trump out of office energized to some degree. However, I will say this that considering how vocal they've been, it's not really people will say, well, people are more enthusiastic about Trump than they are about Biden. Well, that's true, but people are also more enthusiastic about getting rid of Trump. And I mean, it really does kind of reflect the state of the nation, where like somebody like Biden is still worthy enough, right, in order to just get rid of Trump. So I think that's a good assessment.
Yeah, and
That
enthusiasm between Biden and Hillary is day and night, and you got to realize all the resistors and the fucking pussy hat wearers, those sort of people right there is they were fearmongered about Trump during the general election, during the 2016 general election, like, oh, he's going to be terrible. Well, now they've had their biases confirmed through media again. Of course, they're going to exaggerate what how much Trump has done, but kids in cages or Charlottesville or any of these other things they can hit it on, they'll feel like they've been justified in their fear and concern about Trump the first time around, and are probably going to be more energized to get him out of office than they were to get Hillary in office the first time.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And so they have to go with someone that's sort of vivacious and gregarious and outgoing, even though like there's something about Kamala that is so utterly fake. I mean, they're all fake, but they this is the choice they had to make. It's what they could. This is the DNC machine, right? They're not really going to choose. Like they believe in incremental progressivism, right? They're not. They're not going to introduce full communism. They're
Yeah,
not
yeah,
going. You're
boiling the
not going to
frog,
get a
as it were.
healthcare system. You're not going to lose your property. Like none of that shit is going to happen. Like what you are going to get is rule by minorities and selective enforcement of the law.
Yeah, one of the articles I've seen because of course, after these sort of things happen, they dig up all the old campaign points of the person who was picked, and I think it was from August of last year, saying Kamala Harris would use red flag laws to target white nationalists, potential terrorists, or whatever. And
Right.
it's gonna be stuff like that, small stuff that the majority of the country won't notice, that most people will be too out of touch with politics to notice. That again, of course, people who keep up with it, somebody watching this show would know about that, but it's going to be a real boiling the frog thing. They're just going to incrementally do it just a little bit more every time. And the one thing I really think they're going to go overdrive in is probably the like gay and trans rights sort of stuff. The racial stuff,
Mhm.
like I said, they'll probably just inch a little bit. And honestly, I think Biden's running mate probably would have been someone like Klobuchar or Warren had the BLM debacle not happened over the summer because, again, with that agitation, with that racial agitation, they needed the woman of color in office. And Biden already said he wanted a woman, so it defaulted to a woman of color. But I think we probably would have gotten a white woman, and insert your Elizabeth Warren jokes here about a the whole Native American thing or whatever. But I do think that's probably what tipped it to Kamala Harris's favor.
Yes, yes, I completely agree with that. So it'll be a very interesting race. Who knows if we're actually going to have debates? We might have one and not have another one thereafter. Um, Voting week instead of voting day will probably be insane.
Yeah, and
There'll be days
again,
upon days where they won't know what the outcome is. And considering the kind of division and stress in the country, that's going to make some very outrageous events.
and also the war over mail-in voting because with
Yes.
a lot of the COVID stuff, of course, a lot of people are saying we need mail-in ballots, we need to vote, with absentee ballots or whatever, and the Republicans are skeptical. Trump has also made this point, saying, "Well, can you really trust the postal system? What if they tamper with the ballots? What if they destroy it? What if they get lost in the mail?" Which it's funny enough. There actually are some pretty funny stories from 2016. Funny in a like what the hell is going on kind of way about post office workers destroying Trump like ballots that were voting for Trump. So there are some concerns there, but that's also going to be a big issue this election. And if there actually is widespread mail-in voting, we're going to see a situation where, yeah, we probably won't know the results until like a week or two after. It could be another Bush Gore where they're going back and forth, announcing a presumed winner all the way through December. And we don't know until like a couple weeks before the inauguration. Who knows? And honestly, with the current chaos, I wouldn't be surprised if that's the next logical step.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a good assessment. I mean, sometimes I think I know U.S. politics pretty well, but I think I'm not always so sure. I think it takes someone like you who lives there, who is an American, that has a better grasp of these things. I mean, I certainly didn't call Trump winning, and I honestly, seriously thought that he could choose somebody other than Kamala, which in hindsight seems ridiculous now.
Yeah, like I said, I think it could have been any Democratic woman up until the BLM protests, but that solidified it had to be the woman of color. Now, he could have,
Yeah,
I think, to his benefit, uh, reversed it and said, we're just getting a person of color and picked, again, somebody like Cory Booker. I know Cory Booker's kind of clownish, but frankly, I would take him more serious than Kamala and could have picked a black man to be his running mate, and I think that would probably do him a bit better, even though that would be funny with him being the running mate of Black Man and getting a Black Man as a running mate, and I could hear the cries of, oh, we're regressing, race relations are getting worse because of this one particular event. But yeah, I think the BLM protests tipped the scale and won Kamala the vice presidential nomination and possibly the vice presidency. As for Susan Rice, like I said, she'll either be, if Biden wins, National Security Advisor or Secretary of State, and will probably have Biden's ear throughout this final stretch of the campaign because, again, both former Obama administration officials and very pivotal will probably be the architect of Biden's foreign policy going forward, both in his
yeah,
campaign proposals and, like I said, if he actually gets elected, in actually executing these policies. But either way, no matter whether it's Biden or Kamala Harris, this is just the, again, I know this term gets thrown around a lot, but there's really no better term for it. Complete deep state governance. They are going to
Yes.
take their orders from the career bureaucrats, and it's going to be a full entrenchment through all levels of government at that point. With Trump, a lot of disappointments, a lot of things you can say about him, but he's a wrench in the system. He is even inadvertently an agent of chaos, and he can stifle these people. But with someone like that, even more than previous presidents, even more than Obama, Bush, Clinton, Bush Senior, etc., the Biden Kamala administration would probably be the deepest entrenchment of that, and also probably the most crucial time for them to entrench this with everything going on both domestically and foreignly.
Yes, you could say that looking at Trump's presidency, whether you think that he just had nothing but throwaway terms or he was somehow sincere through all of this, there may be more than one reason why he employed this a policy of saying one thing and doing another. Uh, Perhaps one of its intended purposes was to throw everybody off track, not just say China, but deep state America. But is he like? I'm myself am starting to think that most of his presidency was basically providing throwaway terms. Like he's there to placate like whites in America who are going to become a minority
Yeah,
and
he's to pretty much like this is gonna be a terrible analogy, but I can't think of anything better. Like if you're putting on a dog, in this case the dog is the boomers. Trump is like the owner, like petting them right as they stick the needle in.
yes. Yeah, I mean, why do people believe like we saw in all of June and July, and it's still going on in many cities, Chicago notably, but especially in June, when we saw like police departments having not just police departments being burned down, but we're looking at police vehicles that are burned, smashed, rolled down the street until they smash into another police vehicle. Why do we believe that a Trump reelection will stop that?
Yeah, and the big thing is like, oh, this is America under Biden when it's clearly America under
It's actually
Trump's.
under
Yeah,
Trump. It's not
yeah,
under Biden.
it's this big strong Republican who's not supposed to take it from anyone and is here to put America back on top, rolling over for these people. And again, like I said, Trump may have been largely a sham, and I'm not saying that maybe entirely, maybe he was subverted along some point. But the ultimate thing I will say about him is even they were scraping the bottom of the barrel when they said, "Okay, Donald Trump can be president." Will not sabotage his campaign into dust. And lo and behold, what we get is with his rhetoric, with his offhand statements, he is still, to this day, he's still a massive headache for the deep state, for the intelligence agencies, for the career bureaucrats. Even though he's doing everything they want, he's making it very difficult for them to sort of keep quiet about it, really having a lot of slippings of the mask and revealing a lot of things. I mean, think about how many blunders the neoconservative establishment, the neoliberal establishment, have made simply because of Trump. I think 2018 Syria was probably the biggest example where Assad supposedly commits this horrible, horrible, awful chemical gas attack, and then they drum up there's going to be this great American invention that's really going to hit Assad, and it's just bombing some warehouses and some airfields. There was some substantial damage, but again, they were making it sound like it's going to be time for regime change, time for Libya 2.0, time for Iraq 3.0, and what we ended up getting was, like I said, some strikes on some Syrian targets and some finger wagging. So again, it's like that where they overplay their hand. They think we have to do it now or never because Trump is just, whether again you think he's whether you buy into the Q stuff that he is the storm or whatever they say, or his incompetence, his buffoonish nature just makes life a living hell for them, which again is probably that case. But either way, point being is they hate him for whatever reason, whichever one of those reasons it may be.
Right. I mean, he's bad optics. That's essentially why they hate him. I can say this. I think that the sticking point as to whether Trump was sincere or not, or mostly sincere most of the time or not, does come down to Syria. Now, there's basically two ways to look at this. Either the establishment was never serious about going into Syria. Well, you could, bring up Obama in his term, not necessarily his or his action or inactions. Or you could say that Trump was afraid that he would lose his base, but um, I know there's a substantial base that that is his that does not want another Middle Eastern war at all costs. Now you could say that that's why he was intentionally so ineffectual, or that in a wider sense, both like the American establishment, the Pentagon, let's say European partners, Middle Eastern partners, Israel, do not have a viable plan to take out Assad and rearrange that country into their liking, right? And that he kind of plays along with that. Um, if you reject that and say that they would actually go to war, even with all the fallout of even more refugees, then you have to accept that Trump's actions of sometimes inaction or um, completely unexpected statements like "we're pulling out the troops" in late 2018 is something sincere, right? So it's one of the things. It's one of the reasons why I really can never completely make up my mind about him and what he was doing. But I think on some things, like domestically, I think they're just throwaway terms. He knows he doesn't have power. He's not going to do anything. People are holding on to him like their Second Amendment rights will stop them from having to take like diversity training at work or somehow
Immigration. How did you miss that one? Yeah, that's
right, immigration, or like uh, my grandson isn't going to be taken to a tranny reading hour because I have the Second Amendment, right? Like all those ridiculous ideas about taking the country back. Like the country is far more liberal than when he was running for office this time 4 years ago. That's the facts.
yeah, and
Like 4 years ago, you could make fun of someone who had 56 genders. It's against the law now. You're going to lose your job
and
if you're working for a bank or you're working for an office. You have some kind of you work in some kind of a business with a certain amount of social clout. You are going to lose your job, right? So he didn't do anything about changing the culture. He activated all of this, and I'm not here to argue that Hillary would have been better or things wouldn't have turned out the same way.
and
A lot of this, I think, is just the process of history. Like it's madness, and it can't be stopped until it just falls apart.
yeah, again, this trajectory we're on started a probably before any of us were born. Again, you can debate various starting points, but point being is this one election wouldn't have changed it. And I was actually just thinking about this morning in the same vein that people like Pat Buchanan were able to have shows on MSNBC in the 2000s, and again, and this was around the time he wrote Churchill, Hitler, and the Unnecessary War, and a lot of his most quote unquote controversial moments. Imagine that today. So, Trump has changed a lot of things in regard to the culture, but it's also created a massive backlash from the left, from the liberals, in which they're really starting to institutionalize everything they have promoted for years, of course, promoted pretty much unopposed because of their past century of cultural hegemony. But yeah, just all I have to say about this is I'm not telling you to vote one way or another. I'm not even telling you to vote at all. It's really, I'm not here to help you make informed political decisions. I'm just here to tell you my opinion about the situation. But I will say, like I said before, Trump has been, whether knowingly or unknowingly, an agent of chaos, someone who has done a lot of damage in our favor just by existing and being in the White House. He's also put a lot of things in overdrive, such as the American empire, such as a lot of these social issues. Again, he's uh, triggered massive backlashes from the left with the BLM stuff, with a lot of the more quote unquote social progress that's been going on in the past 4 or 5 years. But again, at the end of the day, I do think with by the skin of his teeth, with Kamala and with Biden slipping more and more into senility every day, he probably, like I said, by the skin of his teeth, will pull this next election off.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, it's possible. I don't mean to harp back onto Trump. We've discussed before in other shows, especially the BuzzFeed article and the PBS special, which did a whole thing comparing Netanyahu's relationship with Obama. That and we know about Finkelstein and so on. That certain elements within the American establishment, within the American military and intelligence, and the Israelis do think it's worth playing up on nationalist rhetoric as a way to get what they want in Israel, right? So Trump recognizes the Golan Heights. Trump recognizes Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. Trump, with this ridiculous deal of the century nonsense, more incursions into the West Bank, more annexation. They weren't going to get that from, there was a feeling that they were not going to get that perhaps from Hillary, that optically that was not good, and that they definitely knew that they weren't going to get it from Obama. Because as normie as Biden is, and you could say even as normie as Hillary is, as mainstream DNC representatives, the truth is they do realize part of their party has progressive wings, and they don't have a favorable look on Israel. And there's a certain amount of allegiance to Israel that they cannot tolerate.
Yeah, and then there's also the traditional neoliberals who have disdain for Israel for pretty much making a mess of the Middle East. When again, there's a conflict of visions where it's not like they're complete anti-Zionists, but they view Israel's actions in Palestine, in its relationship with Jordan, perhaps, and Egypt, where Israel's making a lot of trouble. For example, Obama's relationship with Israel was pretty much this. Israel wanted to go further. Obama had this vision of a liberal empire in the Middle East, whereas Israel has this vision in the Middle East where they're hegemonic. And those two visions often butt heads. And then you combine that with the progressive wing, who actually is Free Palestine, completely anti-Zionist. It it does make for a less favorable democratic view of Israel, where the Republicans, they can play on the only democracy in the Middle East and the evangelical line that Israel holds some religious significance for whatever reason, and it does give them more of a hand when a Republican's in office for obvious reasons. And again, if they can get a Republican who makes the founding stock of the nation, as it were, feel at home again, or at least to some degree, or feel like they're at least taking their country back to some degree, uh, not only are they going to be satisfied with the Republican leadership at home, they're also going to be satisfied with the Republican leadership supporting Israel, because most of them do have pro-Israel sentiments.
Right, and they're very optics aware, and you could see that Obama's attempt at the Arab Spring was literally a kind of a compromise. Well, if we can't give Israel extended power and undisputed power over the entire Middle East for the next 100 years, well, why don't we just, instead of that, why don't we just liberalize the entire Middle East? Which, ironically, is not very dissimilar than what George Bush Jr. was trying to do in Iraq. And everybody scoffed at that idea. However, this was just as ridiculous. It was less ridiculous only because it looked like it was organic, and a lot of these protests, of course, they were very misguided. They had a ton of American NGOs, Soros writ large, and many of these contested areas providing money and so on. And it never happened. It didn't work. And I think that was it. I think it was at that point that, let's say, somebody like Benjamin Netanyahu basically realizes, like, this is insane. You're never going to have liberal democracies in these countries, with rare exceptions. So yes, I think that's why he really backed Romney in 2012. He knew he had to get a conservative, and like, American politics had to mirror kind of Israeli politics. Like, they're surrounding us, they're pouring in through the borders. We have to, like it's a kind of defensive action, right? So the illegals are pouring in. I mean, not that they're not. But you see what I mean. So there had to be some kind of parallels where they could empathize with Israel. And I think, like, what we have now with Biden and Kamala, and we talked about, like, the amount of sort of pure control that deep state will have over them in terms of policy making is going to be like something they've never seen before. And if he wins, I think so, right? Because they've pledged allegiance. You'd think they were Republicans 4 years ago pledging this kind of allegiance to Israel, that is.
Yeah,
it's and this is why they couldn't go with, they had to, like, knock Bernie, because of course Bernie's not going to go to these APAC gatherings and so on, right? Like, whether you believe that's, like, real or fake, or it's just another trick.
Yeah, I mean, Bernie's big problem is that
he's been consistent about it.
Yeah, I mean, but again, just to further on that point, Bernie's big problem is, like, he's a big two-state solution guy. We can work it out, and his big contention is, it's the Likud party. They're racist, just like the Republicans. Again, playing back into that, domestic to foreign and foreign to domestic sort of parallel. Yeah. And his big contention with AIPAC is that it's too right-wing. Not that I don't support Israel. Of course I do. It's just that they support the right wing in Israel. I support the left wing in Israel. And that, again, all those little games they play with that.
Right.
But
right, absolutely.
I think that's a wrap on the
I think we exhausted it.
So speaking of other elections, there was one this week in Belarus, and
yes,
officially one Alexander Lukashenko, first and only president of Belarus, got 85% of the vote. Now that's about in line with
it's 80. It's 80.
It's
80.
Yeah, I was seeing 85 initially, but point being is that's still around the range he got last election in 2015, and I don't dispute those numbers either, but of course this election is on the heels of massive protests in the country and desires to move westward from a younger, more liberal population, and a new face of the establishment who I can't even remember her name. I just know it's something very Slavic. And what happened was there was the election, there was the results. People called bull on the results and took to the streets, and there have been clashes ever since. And now that opposition woman, whoever she is, blends in with all other women politicians, is now in hiding in Lithuania.
Yeah, I love it. Yes, they had I guess they kind of thought they could have a lot of hope in her. Of course, all the politicians now that lead in the liberal order have to be women. Women have to be heard because there's just no legitimacy in males leading anymore.
More women war criminals. That's my take.
And I mean what I absolutely love about this is that Lukashenko spent like a few weeks prior cozying up to the Americans. Like, he asked for, like, he's such an idiot. So he asks for, like, he agrees to an American embassy in Minsk, right? And everybody's saying, don't do it. They're going to F you over. Like, he goes along with the gas deal. Dude, don't do it. They're going to F you over. Do you not know like how they work? I mean, we've seen this play before many times. And he did it. And of course, then there was the 33 Russian instigators. And it turns out that actually Ukraine was behind that, and that they're accusing these guys of having fought in Donbass. I don't know whether they have or not. Then you read articles about they were supposed to be sent to Africa uh, or to other places, basically as as mercenaries, and they were never found with any guns. So that's odd. In any case, so yeah, the protests are have started. Now, last night was a little bit more calm than the previous nights, and sure enough, some of the people who have been arrested have been linked, either to like nationalists or also neo-Nazis. Some of them are Antifa. Some of them are liberals. They're two members belong to the Open Russia political organization that Mikhail Khodorkovsky, subsidizes. So one Artem Varenikov and Igor Rogov were arrested. This is no surprise, of course, right? Anytime that they want like a regime change that would affect Russia negatively, they have all the usual guys. I'm not on Twitter, but I'm very sure that Kasparov is writing about this. Max Boot is in arms, but what has Lukashenko done for himself now? Well, he's really backed himself into a corner.
Yeah,
Now,
among the arrested it was either an RT or Sputnik journalist, but point being, it was a Russian state media journalist. It's like, okay, yeah, you want to crack down on all these subversives and dissidents, and then you're just going to attack Russian state media. It's not even like some independent media organization that's just based out of Russia. No, it's pretty much an arm of their government that you're arresting at that point. And
yeah.
I mean, again, he has gone after everyone. He's gone after the pro-Russia crowd, and I mean, it's gotten to the point where even a lot of like hardliner Russian politicians have forsaken him, saying he's gonna get what he bought and paid for. This is what he deserves. He doesn't deserve our help because he stabbed us in the back. There's a lot of those sentiments. Now, the one thing I've noticed that's really different between the Maidan and the Ukrainian protests and this is the Ukrainian protest had much more of that nationalistic fervor with a lot more of those Stahlhelm wearing groups, the ones with the red and black banners, where it seems like the faces of this protest in Belarus are more on the liberal side, especially with his opposition leader. Whereas, again, they're not really pulling out the sort of hardline nationalist card, the Belarus, we need to stand up to Russia and be a strong Slavic nation. More so, we need to be an open liberal nation is the narrative of this protest. I would say, I don't know, maybe it's because there's less of that to draw in Belarus, because, again, Ukraine does have, admittedly, a stronger national identity you can pull on, but it may just go back to the point where things have accelerated so far that you have to play the liberal game if you want that outside support, and if you want to be a protest movement taken seriously, you have to be about freedom and democracy and peace and elections and all that, all that crap.
Right. Yeah, I've noticed that too, that this has a very, very liberal, progressive female energy to it. And I guess they're going to bypass. I mean, Belarus never had a kind of, how can I put it, separatist, patriotic wing, the kind that you saw in Ukraine. Especially the Galicians in the west of the country. But I mean, anything could happen because the fact is it's a minority that basically took over Ukraine, and a lot of revolutions, like that's how they're fought. A vocal minority always beats a silent majority. And whether we're talking about the U.S. in 1776, or we're talking about it in 2020 in sort of in a reverse. That's the case, and so it's still in play. But the truth is, even if Lukashenko subdues these protests, and I believe he will actually, I believe they will run out of steam. Um, what is coming next, however, is going to be rough because he will now deal with an American embassy in Minsk. He will have to deal with subversion forever, and he will deal with sanctions, lots and lots of sanctions.
And
Uh,
I'm not saying
eh, eh,
Russia will completely cut him off or forsake him, but there is some bad blood there now. He did piss off Putin himself, and that was one of the other big things. The point where, like, okay, yeah, he's angered the West. There will be sanctions. There will be cries of anti-democracy, all these sort of things. But again, he won't necessarily be able to turn towards Russia to the degree he may have in 2015 or 2010.
yeah, I think Russians are also fed up of subsidizing Ukrainians and subsidizing Belarusians, right? I mean, it's not like Russia gets rich from these countries. These countries are highly dependent on energy and a whole bunch of other things. Russians don't go to Belarus to find work, and they don't go to Ukraine to find work. It's the reverse, right? Um, so it is 9% of the population is Russian, but they're not like they've always been there. They're not they're not there because they didn't have work in Russia. Um, but that said, Belarus is it's actually a really kind of wonderful country. It's very clean, very safe. It's miles better than I don't mean to piss off our viewers, but it just is. It's miles better than Moldova or Romania or Bulgaria or Bosnia. There's many other Eastern European countries that it's like a far nicer place to be in. Now, I don't know all the details of what has happened economically there, or what provoked Lukashenko to think that he could side with the Americans and and the IMF, and because we all know he even courted the IMF, but they told him you have to have lockdown COVID procedures to get the loan. Um, he did not play this card very well. He's no Erdogan, so and he doesn't really have that much power. It's a small nation of 10 million people, right?
Yeah,
And
its geography isn't anything impressive either. No great amount of natural resources. No, I mean, I suppose farmland you could make a case for, but again, especially with the Erdogan comparison, it's not Turkey. You don't have something like the Bosphorus Straits you can leverage.
mhm. Yeah, so there's very little leverage. He all he can do is kind of prostitute himself. And he can only that prostitution only works if Russia is strong, not if Russia is weak. So yeah. Now for Russia, of course, this could turn very bad because if things go sour in Russia, this could be a catalyst for uprisings to occur there, um, especially in the Western European side of Russia. And of course, it's a security risk. Now, how much will Russia tolerate? This is a country that in 1994 had agreed to merge as one country into a superstate in 94, and that got kicked down the road over and over and over again. And it's really that's something that shouldn't have been allowed. It would have, of course, presented other problems because then Russia, ipso facto, would not have had a buffer state.
Yeah,
And
it would have had a direct border with Poland and
Poland.
the other two Baltic states. I mean, it has one with Estonia right now and what Latvia maybe, but again, it would have a much larger border with NATO countries in general. So it would have been some more liabilities, and of course, under the Yeltsin leadership, no reintegration was going to happen, which that's when the referendum was in '94. And then early Putin, that definitely wasn't going to happen. But I do have to say, this may be a little unpopular again among some of our audience, but that article you sent me today that I was reading through, it made some good points about uh, one of the big problems with Russian foreign policy, the reason why, for example, Ukraine got to the state it did, and now we're seeing what's happening in Belarus. I mean, the outcome, again, I would say it's anyone's guess at this point, is because he's been much more reactive than proactive. What has he done to?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure he's done something, but again, what has he? What like strong actions does he take to prevent this, rather than dealing with the fire on his border right now? When I would say, and I know this example probably isn't going to be the best. In 2019, when Lukashenko was saying maybe it is time for the Union State, maybe it is time to reunify, again, that was probably saying, hey, West, give us a better deal or else we're going to join Russia, playing that sort of game. But
Yeah.
again, I think there's several opportunities Putin could have seized on where he could have said, well, I think it's time to form the Union State, or I think it's time for closer integration with Belarus. But he waits until there's uprisings in the street to say, you want better cooperation. Now, of course, Lukashenko is going to be in a much weaker position, more willing to sign something like that. But again, how good is an agreement like that when it's signed under those conditions? So I do think the Russian leadership kind of dropped the ball when it comes to something right in their backyard.
Right, and I think the moment passed at least about 10 years ago. I don't think it was, you know, a year ago or 4 years ago or 6 years ago or 7 years ago. I think it was, realistically speaking, it was probably about 10 years ago. And, around that time in Eastern Europe, China, for instance, was making a whole bunch of overtures to Eastern European nations. Western Europe started to get bothered by this and start to have concerns. So, of course, they pounced on getting deals with China. However, the deals that China had promised to Eastern Europeans never actually materialized. And as you say, that's probably what Lukashenko was doing when he was offering that. But, that was actually a really good time to actually take him up on it. Now, we're not in back doors listening to all of this. We don't know what happens. We don't know, like, all the ins and outs and what prevented that from happening and what kind of advisors either of those men had. So who knows? But, from our point of view, which, admittedly is a very limited point of view, one would think that is, 2007, 2008, 2009 would have been a very good year to reintegrate. At that point, Russia would have been would have dealt with the whole Georgia thing with Saakashvili. Now, I guess under Medvedev, maybe Medvedev wasn't in favor of that, but I doubt that that Putin was not the guy that was really in charge when Medvedev was president. I strongly doubt that. I think maybe Medvedev had more input than Putin maybe had liked.
Yeah, he
but
definitely had his ear, to say the least.
yes,
But yeah, I mean, that was before the Crimea crisis, before the Ukraine crisis, before there was mass amount of sanctions on Russia. And if it would have been a uh, peaceful unification, I doubt the West would have said much, especially considering Obama's big thing coming to office was the Russian reset. I, that probably would have been a good time for Medvedev and Putin to extract that, saying, "Yeah, we'll play by the West rules, we'll acquiesce to you, but we want Belarus, we want reintegration with some of our former territory." And again, maybe that wasn't necessarily on the table at that point, but again, just from the outsider's perspective and in hindsight, it looks like they could have played that, especially with they were really banking on Russia becoming part of this great neoliberal order. That was the vision of Obama. That was the vision of Hillary Clinton, at least in the first term of Obama. And again,
yeah. Well, I mean, in 2008, Russia was asking to be part of NATO.
I
So
yeah,
that it was a strange time. Very it like it was like literally a different world. I know that economically, Russia was back on its feet and was, well, much better than it was in, say, 98 as opposed to 2008. And I don't know what we'll have those questions for Varangian, because I wonder also, was taking on Belarus, was absorbing Belarus going to impact the economy negatively in Russia? Maybe. I don't know. I don't know Russian politics as that well in order to, say one thing or another definitively.
I mean, but you would think in a country with, again, such a declining population as Russia, not that the West doesn't have similar birth. I mean, again, pretty much all white Western nations have the similar birth rate crisis. Any Western nation or white nation with a growing population is due to immigration. I think we all know that. But again, you figure in a country that has this problem with immigration, that has this problem with birth rates, that an extra 10 million people might actually be welcome. Again, I don't know the economic conditions at the time, especially in 08, 09, but it really seemed like the time to do it. And I think we can really attribute this that it was a different world. And we can also, to put this in perspective, Putin has this reputation that he's whatever the person talking about him wants him to be. Whether he's this far right crypto fascist, whether he's an agent of the Zionists, a neo Soviet communist, again, a variety of different things. He's been accused of all these things. But realistically, what he is he's a career bureaucrat who has spent his entire time, his almost entire time in office, prioritizing the stability and unity of Russia. And again, especially early on, and even to this day, that was a necessary task. You needed to acquiesce all the interests, whether that be the oligarchs, whether that be the ethnic minorities, whether that be the Russian nationalists. You had to keep them all at bay, keep them all from destroying each other. And it may have been just that, the fact that he was a career bureaucrat, career intelligence agent with some more or less pro-Western sympathies, especially in the 2000s, and I would say right up till the Ukraine crisis, that he didn't play that card, and of course, by proxy through Medvedev and other Russian politicians. But I do think that was probably the reason they didn't pounce on it then.
Yes, I think, and also, those states were formed during the Soviet Union, right? And in the first half of the Soviet Union, like, Ukrainians and Belarusians were encouraged to speak in their language. The Russians were looked at as chauvinists.
Yeah, it was this
Basically,
time of brotherhood of nations, and we're all equal partners
right.
within this union. And of course, that also plays into Germany giving these countries independence after their defeat of Russia in 1917, 1918, Brest-Litovsk Treaty, all of that, and then the reintegration of the Soviet Union. And again, those policies really didn't go away until like the late Soviet Union and even arguably post-collapse. So there was that,
Well,
but continue.
if you look at books published in Belarusian versus Russian from like 1918 to 1950, 80 to 90% of the books published are all in Belarusian. They're not, Russian makes up only 10 or 20%. And it's not until Khrushchev that things start to change, right? And it's again, it's also acquiescing, because Khrushchev also is the one who gave Crimea to the Ukrainians, amongst other regions. So, yeah, that's kind of the pickle that Russia is in right now. What will happen? I think your assessment of Putin basically being a reactionary is a good one. His sort of vision of Russia was like just to save Russia. It's very much like it was very much a vision post 90s or 90s Russia, where just keeping it intact, that it didn't I mean, because of course it was looted and gutted, but looted and gutted beyond recognition, that didn't happen. And so that was basically the Putin's vision.
Yeah,
Uh,
like the resolution of the Chechnya crisis and prioritizing economic recovery and stability, and just keeping their heads above the water, as it were.
Yeah, I mean, when you look back from like the late 80s to the early 2000s, it's really extraordinary that Russia even came out of it. Many other nations would have crumbled. That would have been over.
Yeah, and I have to admit that's the reason why I'm so hesitant to count Russia out when they have their problems on the world stage, is because they have a tendency to bounce back throughout their history, whether it be you go as far back as the Mongol invasions, the collapse of the Russian Empire, the rise of the Soviet Union, the collapse of the Soviet Union, and even up until now. Like, they have a certain resilience about them. I mean, again, if you want to get into it, it's all.
Mhm.
I mean, all nations, all empires, all civilizations have their expiration date at some point. But again,
Yeah.
I'm so hesitant to count Rush out because they've had a lot of close calls and they've managed to come back. And I don't see this current situation as bad as it is, whether it be with Ukraine and Belarus, and controlling probably the least amount of territory it has in how many centuries? I don't know. It's like since it's probably the 1500s. It still looks like it's not
It's
going
still
to
the
collapse
largest
anytime
country
soon.
in the
Yeah, it's
world.
still the largest country in the world.
Yeah. So I don't have anything myself, anything else for to say about Belarus. And I'm sure we're going to get into the thick of it even more so when we have Vile on.
Yeah, I think that wraps up that topic, and I suppose Greece and Turkey next, and that'll lead us into some of our more Middle Eastern news. But the big news out of Greece is that they have called all their troops that are on leave back to service, and they haven't mobilized any reserves. They haven't called up a general mobilization or conscription or anything, even though I think they have just a general conscription even in peacetime. But point being is they stepped up one level of readiness, and this follows Turkey's brazen moves, whether it be uh, in Libya, in Syria, because they've been doing a lot in Syria this week too, and this also, of course, follows the constant violations of airspace and the what have been called mock dogfights between the two. And it's probably the closest to war they've been in decades. Probably the closest they've been to war in, I would say, since the 1970s, since the whole Cyprus crisis. And who knows how that's going to turn out, because I know things have been kind of heating up there too, and I imagine something like that would spill over into Greece proper with the relationship between Greece and Cyprus. But that could be the one thing, honestly. Like, right now, between everything happening in Europe and in the Middle East, I would say those two areas in particular, surprisingly enough, not even Asia, even with China's more brazen moves, it's a real powder keg right now. Like, Belarus could be set off. We could see something happen there. There's a lot happening within the European Union, even just non-militarily, just on a political and economic level. And then on top of all that, there's Greece and Turkey about to trade blows. And really, it takes one of those events to go off to set the others off and plunge it into an era we haven't seen probably in a century. Maybe a little less. I wouldn't go as far as to call it comparable to the world wars. But point being is, as we were talking off air, right now the issue is every country views its opponent as too strong. Greece and Turkey don't want to go to wars because they aren't willing to stomach the casualties because they think the other's too strong. Russia doesn't want to go into Belarus because it thinks the West is too strong. The West is hesitant to do full regime change democracy in Belarus or even a Maidan to Belarus because they view Russia as too strong and too likely to react. And the European Union, again, they're walking on a tightrope with the sort of split going on. The French demanding more spending, the Germans demanding that it be more frugal. So you have all these things culminating, and I mean, one of them's got to pop off within the next few years here. And I'm not saying that like, that'd be great, another crisis, plunge things into chaos. But point being is, I'm just saying, from a factual standpoint, from a standpoint, if you're being honest with yourself, one of these things has to go wrong, and it'll likely set the others off in due time. And again, the most likely one I see at this point is Greece and Turkey, especially with Turkey's actions. Now, again, they've been aggressive in Syria, they've been aggressive in Libya. They haven't incurred into Europe beyond the releasing of the flows of migrants, and who knows if they'll try that again. I'm sure they have that up their sleeve this time, even though with the sort of collective defense that a lot of European countries showed, that might not be the case. But again, they're bound to try something like that again at some point. But I honestly see, even if it's a small war, even if it's a couple weeks of skirmish that results in no clear victor and no clear goals being accomplished, I see Greece and Turkey having a live fire incident that expands into, like I said, at least a small war within the next few years, if not within the next year.
Yeah, potentially it could be them more than anyone else. Now, this disputed zone uh, that Turkey is contesting between Greece and Egypt is kind of interesting because really Turkey has no right over this area. I mean, if you look at the map, basically it's an area, let's say halfway between Egypt and Crete, although it's closer to Egypt than it is to Crete. Um, the only way you could contest that is to say, well, Libya is mine. And in a sense, that's what Turkey is saying. Libya is mine. However, it's not the side of Libya that Turkey controls. So this is this is the area that they're contesting. And just today or yesterday, a Greek maritime military vessel fired at a Turkish vessel. It's not military. The Turkish one was not military, and I haven't seen much else about it. Um, so, so this is far and away from like Cyprus. How anybody could confuse that this is part of Cyprus? Honestly, the area that's contested is a little bit closer actually to Crete than it is to anywhere near Cyprus. Uh, but Turkey is playing a game of is there some game, and they simply will not allow it. I think also Erdogan is basically doing it essentially to gain support in Turkey. Uh, some of his support has been waning, and picking on Turkey is an easy. Picking on Greece is an easy way to foster short-term support.
Yeah, and then of course you had the uh, Azerbaijan Armenia conflict, in which they were immediately behind Azerbaijan, and again, it's enough to play up on the uh, Sunni Islam elements, enough to play up on the Turkish nationalist elements, and again, it probably does have to do with Biden's internal support, where he's solidifying things, where it's becoming where, again, Turkey's in a very transitional phase from the republic that people like Ataturk built, this secular regime, into, again, becoming more the hub of Sunni Islam for the first time in 100 years since the collapse of the Ottoman Empire, and really, again, talking in very Ottoman terms, like I'm sure you'll all remember the Ottoman slap he threatened Trump with. That was like early 2018, and it's
Hmm.
like I said, we're witnessing the revival of a Turkish bloc, where Turkey wants to call the shots in their own backyard, where they want to be a regional power. They want some degree of hegemony over the Middle East, and they want to be able to extract whatever the concessions they can from the Balkan countries. Now, I doubt, again, they're going to be invading, annexing Greece and Bulgaria and Macedonia anytime soon, but point being is they want them to bend to their will, and they're willing to
Hmm.
show a little bit of force and fire a few shots and violate some airspace to get it. Now, how much Greece will put up with, how much Bulgaria will put up with, that is another question. And if it did go into even a small few week conflict, where would NATO stand? what country would side with what side. I mean, already you have the uh, contention with Greece having a strong relationship with France as of late, and of course the German-Turkish relationship has been strong for about 15 years now. I mean, that's already pitting the two biggest countries in the European Union against each other. Again, not that they're going to go to war with each other, but again, to create that kind of internal division in such a weak EU and such a unstable NATO would be uh, it would be monumental at this point.
Mhm. Yeah, and it would also but and we discussed this on the last show about the growing divisions within NATO. Um, I think we're going to see more going into the future. I think we're going to see like an Eastern European bloc versus Russia, and a Western European bloc that relies more on Russia, especially for fuel. And that's one. Another one will be the Turkey Greece conflict, which in a way has always been there. Um, and America will have to find unilateral agreements to basically appease all of them. But this, protracted over time, will eventually cause conflicts. Like that works for a while until it doesn't work, until someone is pissed at you for making a deal with a foe, because you don't know if in the future the deal you made with the French is really pissing off the Poles and so on.
Yeah, there's no grave threat to solidify them. For example, there's no Soviet Union. They've tried to revive that with Russian aggression in the wake of Crimea 2013, 2014, 2015. That didn't work. They even tried to say we need to be a bloc against terrorism during the wake of 9/11 and the war on terror in Iraq. That didn't work. More recently, they tried saying, well, we need to play a proactive role in keeping China in check. But again, a lot of these European countries, which actually have a lot of deep running economic ties with China, especially as of late, it didn't work that way either. So, again, they have failed to find this grand unifying threat, and these old rivalries are coming back to the surface because of it.
Mm. Yeah.
I suppose with that, we can move on to a little bit of an update on Lebanon. So, of course, there was the massive explosion last week, and it did untold damage economically, destroying one of their most significant ports in the country that's almost entirely reliant on sea trade. It killed hundreds of people, injured thousands, millions, if not billions, in property damage done at this point, and just a general feel of desperation in Lebanon, a lot of finger pointing. Already, the American aid package is contingent on some arms restrictions on Hezbollah or whatever. France is trying to step in. Macron is trying to play the hero abroad so he can say, we're a humanitarian power. France is really looking out for its own former colonies, and we're doing right by them. And look at all this aid we're giving to Lebanon. Of course, Israel pounced on the opportunity to give an aid package. Uh, the I believe Russia set up a field hospital there. Iran also set up a hospital there. Syria sent some degree of aid, but point being is what had become, I hate to use the term because it's so bastardized, a unifying humanitarian effort to make up for this massive loss, both in life and um, economic productivity, has become a race for influence with these various different actors, some more than others, becoming vultures in the country, making concessions now, deciding what they want, carving up the country. You see sectarian tensions rising, especially with France's involvement, that has really riled up some of the Islamic groups there, especially some of the, surprisingly enough, Sunni Muslim groups. I figured with Iran and Hezbollah and the Shia Muslim bloc there, it would have been them. But I think it was actually more among the Sunni Muslims that had the outrage there. You had the resignation of their entire government, just calling it quits and scrapping and starting over. So, on top of that, you're probably going to have another election sometime soon, and that's on top of the economic damage worldwide from COVID. That's on top of the economic damage done by this port. That's on top of all the people who've died, and the rising tensions between the various different political, religious, and ethnic factions. So it's, again, I hate to keep on using this term, and at this point I'm just gonna make this title of the episode. It's a real powder keg in Lebanon.
Yeah, it is, and this is going to be, you know, an amazing turn of events. For one, the what is it? The French Mystery class of carriers is so one helicopter carrier is expected to arrive tomorrow or the next day. On it, besides the helicopters, will be 700 Army personnel or Marine personnel. And of course, there'll be American representatives and British representatives. So, in a way, Lebanon will be kind of taken over by the West. And this will add new pressure to Hezbollah and Iran. Uh, Furthermore, the the ousted uh, parliament, it got ousted yesterday in a sort of a vote of an unofficial vote of no confidence. They basically resigned. There were five ministers who resigned, and then it just snowballed from there. And but there is the investigation as to whether this was a bomb or not, that whether this was really truly an accident or not, is ongoing. And it is strange that Trump said that according to what he got from his generals in conversations with them, that they think this was a bomb, this was an attack. And of course, why say that? Because of course, who's going to think like this is an attack by anyone else other than, like, say, Israel or America? I mean, a sane person would think that, but of course, Western media, of course, will say that Hezbollah did that. You know, if they go along with the attack. Now, I think they're going to have to drop it because it's so unlikely. Um, Hezbollah had 13 ministers, and it was the most amount of control they've ever had in Lebanese parliament. And for them, like them blowing up Lebanon's only port, is not only political suicide; it is out of character.
Not to
It
mention,
is literally
it's also at the time of slipping political popularity, where something like them doing that would completely spurn their political chances. And
yes,
again, they had the most political power that they could conceivably control as a Shia Muslim party, and
yes,
it would be squandering it. And like I said, that's something you'd expect more from the Sunni Wahhabist sort of faction. Not again, I'm not
yeah.
saying Hezbollah it has no blood on its hands, but whenever they do something, it's usually a very concerted military effort, whether that be against Israel, whether that be in Syria, whether that be anywhere else, and
Yeah.
just these mass like terrorist attacks you would expect from a group like Al Qaeda or ISIS isn't really the way they operate.
No. Uh, to say nothing of, like, over now, the estimate is at 200 dead, definitely over 160 dead, thousands injured, thousands more homeless. And you're talking about a nation that has a half a million, and it's a tiny, tiny nation. A half a million of the population is Palestinian, and 1 million are Syrian refugees. Just, let that sink in. And so they have, so in a way, they're kind of seeing, like, how even their own country is, like, as small and tiny as it is, they're losing ground to literally house refugees. And now they have a portion of their population, and I've seen estimates of like 100,000 that are homeless. And where are they going to stay? So it's a country that's completely besieged, and of course they're going to get all kinds of loans, and those loans are going to come with lots and lots of strings attached. And it's basically so that they become a kind of a de facto Western state, or a state that Israel is happy with. Now, it would be now, to really make Israel happy, it would have to be a state that completely rejects Hezbollah, and that is not going to happen. So, how are you going to do that? Well, there's war, and the other thing is to acquiesce. So either there'll be a war from within, a battle, say, between different sectors to oust Hezbollah, and I don't think that's going to happen
Yeah, there's
because,
there's
frankly,
still a lot of national trauma from the civil war that ended in the '90s.
Absolutely, absolutely. And they are right now. Their economy is so wrecked. It's literally the lowest. Their dollar is the lowest it's ever been. I believe it's called the lira. So there's the collapse of that. All their funding would have to come from somewhere else, and I just don't think it's in the average Lebanese psyche, whether they're Sunni, Shia, or Christian. I don't think they want this, and what that ultimately means is if Hezbollah is still there, then there has to be a war between Hezbollah and Israel, or Hezbollah and Israel plus Europeans and America.
And I can't really
Long term, that is, you know, I don't think Israel is going to settle for anything less than the complete removal of Hezbollah. I just don't.
Yeah, and I can't foresee, especially in a country that's what 1/3 Shia Muslim, where tensions keep on rising, that this group is just going to voluntarily disarm. Now, how much they represent the concerns of the average Shia Muslim, I honestly do not know. I don't know the ins and out of Lebanese politics, but point being is, I can't think of anyone with the stomach of the war, whether it be the Sunni Islam and Christian factions within Lebanon, whether it be Israel, whether it be the West, whether it be Hezbollah itself. I don't think anyone really wants uh, to light that spark and be responsible for yet another 30 years of civil war in Lebanon, especially as the decade of civil war in Syria is just now calming down.
Yeah. You could also look at this as a kind of a desperation, right? They didn't get Syria, and they're going to need to take Lebanon if they can't get Syria. Yeah, ultimately that's what it comes down to, because they want they want like zero Iranian influence in Lebanon, but that's not really going to fly. That's not like ultimately that means a civil war, and if Lebanese are not willing to fight a civil war, then the onus again is back on America and Israel to do that. And with some American with some European powers that'll have to limp along and get involved as well. France, but probably Britain as well, and Germany may or may not volunteer any troops. I could see some other Eastern European countries in NATO that will definitely volunteer troops to be in Trump's good graces and
Yeah,
so
yeah.
on.
Poland will send like 100, 200, so like they did in Iraq, or Mongolia will
Yes.
send their 50. I know that's Asia, but perhaps the Mongols are the only people who can sort this situation out now. Maybe that's what we've been forced to resort to. But
Yes.
another factor, despite how small Lebanon is, despite their population in comparison to Iraq, Syria, and a lot of these other Middle Eastern countries, again, that's probably going to lead to more refugees in Turkey and more refugees in Europe, uh, increasing an already ever growing situation. People are going to be trying to get in there, and that's probably going to spur on Turkey to do more opening of the valve and letting migrants pour into Europe. If they start getting tens, if not hundreds of thousands of people from Lebanon pouring into their country.
Yeah.
So it's a bad situation all around, and I really don't see, unless there's some agreement between the international powers, including, like, of course, U.S., pretty much the big five: U.S., U.K., France, Russia, and China. Unless they can all come to an agreement to some degree for some sort of economic bailout for Lebanon, it's going to be a messy situation. Or even if it's just like a bilateral agreement between France or Russia, or France and China or whatever. Even though I'm pretty sure France is probably going to be the pivotal one here with how much Macron has, how much political capital he's put into this. But point being is, it's going to take a lot to buoy their economy up, and that's probably the one thing keeping them from from devolving into another civil war. That, and that the people don't have a stomach for it. But again, you decrease their living conditions, you get rid of their material comfort, they're more likely to do a lot more drastic things in that case.
Yeah, and we should mention that there was an incursion of three Israeli tanks into Lebanon proper. They bypassed a fence that I think even the the Israelis had set up themselves as a kind of a border between themselves and Lebanon, and they have retreated since then. No one was hurt. Some gas, some camouflage, some gas um, munitions were lodged. I guess that was because they might have been afraid that they had sights placed on them. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's
Now,
basically.
with that, I suppose
Yeah,
we
go
can.
ahead.
We're pushing an hour 20 here. I suppose if we can just get these last 10 minutes brief rundown of Syria and Libya, we'll do that. And
Yeah.
I think the smoothest transition would be into Syria. So we'll pull up that. And there's been a lot of Turkish action in northwestern Syria near the greater Idlib area, a lot of Russian action as well, and establishing new forts of course, convoys coming in, all these patrols going on. It seems like this new Kurdish uprising you're getting is still ongoing, as well as, of course, the Nomad Revolution is also happening. And the usual chasing of patrols. There was a fire in Damascus. We may talk about this next week, but I couldn't really find a spot to put this in. Ever since Lebanon, there's been a series of just all these explosions happening, whether it be in the UAE, I saw one in Russia, I think there was one in France, I think there was even one in the United States, of just these chemical plants or wherever just exploding. And it's, yeah, it's, I'm not saying like they're connected in any way, but it's just a sign of the times. It's just a complete manifestation of the absolute chaos the world has been flung into, and that's all I'll say about that. But of course, you have the assassination of more Syrian intelligence officers, and the odd ISIS attack here and there in Homs and other parts of central and eastern Syria. But surprisingly enough, Syria is somehow one of the more calmer areas of the world as of late.
Yeah, it's kind of really a replay of last week. Um, there isn't really much progress except tensions have erupted in Latakia, in the southern part of Greater Idlib. Um, Honestly, don't know how much longer this will drag on. Um, Not, I don't really like the way things are going in Syria because things aren't going, um, and that's a problem.
Yeah, and then with Belarus breaking out and Russia's attention with that, I mean, for all we know, this whole recent debacle in Belarus, one of the primary things which I haven't put together until this exact moment I'm speaking it, may have been to tie up Russian resources from Syria. Because if they're focused on a fire in their own backyard, at the end of the day, hell, they might let Russia have it, but they may just be trying to buy enough time in order to destabilize Syria more, in order to increase the chaos there enough to the point where, like, yeah, I mean, if there's chaos in Syria, if there's chaos in Belarus, Russia's probably going to be focused on the one that's right on their own border. Now, I think they tried this with Ukraine, but it didn't work out to the same degree. But who knows this time? And like I said, I just put that together, and I can't believe I didn't mention that earlier.
Yeah, I think there's that, but I think if you look at on aggregate, the last, because the real push and the real gains that the Syrian army made were at the end of February. And if you look on aggregate the last 4 or 5 months, and I know this is a 9-year war. There's been many periods in this war where 4 or 5 months, 6 months, 7 months have gone by with very little change, and then stuff happens. I will say definitely the last 4 months, Russia hasn't been doing that much, to be honest. So, uh, if anything, I kind of, yeah, I would look for like some kind of a push to occur in Turkey, to see what Syria, to see what happens. Or it may be that they keep the status quo as it is for the next few months to see what happens in Belarus. But like all I'm saying is even without Belarus as a question mark, Russia, and like we've been dealing with a stalemate for quite some time now.
I think everyone's just waiting for everyone else to fire the first shot so they can go in and not have to deal with the flack of having started. Similar to the case in Lebanon, except the fact that it's an actual active war going on right now. But I think both sides, whether it be the Turkish faction, whether it be the rebel factions, whether that be the Assad faction, or whether that even be the Kurdish factions, is waiting for one or two of the other to make the first move so they can act accordingly. And I think that's probably the biggest cause of this most recent stalemate in Syria.
Right. I think the number one thing is what happens to Turkey. Like, if Turkey overextends itself in Libya, this dispute with Greece, it doesn't like it's not even really wanted in Syria. Even its support that it gives to the radicals and the jihadists in Idlib isn't, you know, it isn't a love affair, if you will. It's more or less pragmatic. Oftentimes they shoot them. They literally have to shoot these jihadists that are like blocking the roads. And so if they become overextended themselves, that will be the opportunity.
I would say so. And again, that depends on how Turkey does in Libya, which we'll talk about here in a couple minutes, and how they do in Syria, and again, with the situation in the Balkans, and even with the situation in the Caucasus now. I think, again, it all depends. Is Turkey going to be able to pull off just this massive region-wide maneuver that they've been doing for the past few months now? And that's the real question. I
Mhm.
honestly don't have an answer or even a prediction for it.
Yeah, I don't know either. I think we'll just have to wait and see.
So, since we are getting a little up there in time, we're pushing an hour and a half right now, we will briefly cover Libya. So, right now, it seems like Egypt has really taken the situation into their own hands. They've been bombing GNA targets, but there's also been a lot of Turkish flights to and from in terms of sending supplies and mercenaries, etc. Same with Russian flights taking off from other locations in the Middle East. So, uh, I would say it's really been Egypt's week in Libya. They are pushing further in. They are uh, kind of taking charge of the situation. This is probably the best the LNA has fared in several months, ever since Turkey got involved and started supporting the GNA.
Mhm.
And really, there's not much other news out of there except for those of you who can see the map right now. All those yellow indicators are of Egyptian actions, and I don't know. It seems like they've actually made a substantial dent in GNA territory that the GNA pushed further in. So I don't know. Will CC take us all the way to Tripoli? That might be the case. Really reviving the legacy of of the uprisings in Egypt in the 1800s, around there, late 1800s, and it's interesting because not that Turkey hasn't had a hell of a time in Syria in dealing with Russia and dealing with even these Iranian-backed forces, but I do think in Libya in particular, what we're seeing now is I think Turkey may have met its match in terms of its expansionist activities, and it seems like
Yeah.
Egypt is really the only country in the region willing to put their foot down about this. And I would say, correction, one of the only capable countries. I mean, because of course, Syria is doing all they can, but look at the state there. Iraq, I doubt they're too happy about it. Again, these countries that are doing what they can, but in terms of countries that could actually make an impact in Turkey's ambitions, it seems like Egypt is the only one in the Middle East that's really taking that into their own hands. But there's not much other news out of Libya I had for that,
Yeah,
unless you.
it's a surprise. I didn't think that that Egypt would go this far, but they mean business. They're not kidding. They've basically halted the Turks, and this has been a huge pickup for the LNA. And as far as I know, Turkey has not acquired any of the oil fields down in the southwest of the country where apparently the Russians are. So, things could get troublesome for Turkey quite soon too. Uh, like I say, if it extends itself, overextends itself, it'll probably be with Greece. It seems very angered. If you look at the politicians in Turkey right now are fuming. They feel like they're not being heard. They feel they're completely in the right. Like this zone is definitely like none of Greece's and Egypt's place without Turkey also being part of that equation. I fail to see how. They literally don't have, like, again, unless you think Libya belongs to Turkey, this is their jurisdiction. You really don't think here. So it'll be interesting to see how far Greece pushes it, and it could be the catalyst that causes Turkey to start making blunders. And with Turkey's economy going down, and Erdogan, because again, I think Erdogan converting the Hagia Sophia from a museum back into a mosque was again a play to for re-election and for support. But things aren't well in Turkey, and we'll see how it goes. If Libya is a failure, and if, there's a loop between Greece and Egypt, and there's nothing that Turkey can do about it, I don't know. It's not going to be good. We're going to see Turkey make more claims about freeing 3 million refugees into Europe, and we're going to hear all that over again. And we won't just hear it, we'll see it.
Yeah, and again, I think probably the biggest tipping point, the biggest powder keg we're dealing with in the world right now is, aside from, I would say, if India and Pakistan really start to go head to head in any substantive way, I think it's Turkey's activities in the Middle East and with its neighboring countries. That would probably be the one thing that sets off a chain reaction. Now, of course, I'm not saying it's going to be another world war or anything, but in terms of sparking these other crises into full swing, such as the crisis in the European Union and NATO, even with Russia on and its former territories such as Belarus, such as Ukraine, and just all around like that part of the world, Middle East and Europe. I think it's going to be, to plug a former episode title, some Turkish tenacity that's going to get us there.
Hmm.
So I think that about does it for this week. Unless you have anything else we missed.
No, I think that about covers everything.
Well, thank you everyone for tuning in to this little bit longer edition of the War Report. As I said at the beginning, we will have Vile Varangian on probably Mondays when that episode will come out, but we'll be recording that over this weekend. So keep your eye out for that. We're going to be talking about all things Russia, Belarus, Ukraine, of course that part of the world, because he's from there. And I suppose we'll see you guys then, and goodbye.
Take care, guys.